Today on the Matt Walsh Show, it has finally come to light that the illegal immigrant who murdered Laken Riley in Georgia was transported to the state on a tax-funded flight set up by the Biden administration. The government directly facilitated the murder of an American citizen. Also, Jen Psaki insists that Democrats must double down on their most unpopular and roundly rejected ideas. Morning Joe bows and kisses Trump's ring in a humiliating and debasing display. And girl math makes its way into the government. We'll talk about all that and more today on the Matt Walsh Show. Look, we're all feeling the impact of Biden's economy. Grocery prices are through the roof, utilities keep climbing, and childcare costs are absolutely crushing American families. Many of us have been forced to rely on credit cards just to make ends meet. Those interest rates are criminal. But here's some good news. The Fed has finally dropped interest rates, and my friends at American Financing can help you take advantage of this opportunity. This is the perfect time to consolidate that high-interest debt and actually reduce your monthly expenses. American Financing is helping homeowners just like you save an average of $800 per month. They're efficient, too. Some closings are happening in as little as 10 days. Even better, if you start today, you might be able to delay 2 mortgage payments. Listen, I wouldn't recommend them if I didn't trust them, and they won't charge you anything up front to find out how much you can save. So you lose nothing. You might as well call American Financing today, 866-569-4711. That's 866-569-4711. Or if you're more digitally inclined, visit americanfinancing.net/Walsh. NMLS 182-334 Consumer Access. Do it now before the next economic crisis hits. NMLS 182-334 ConsumerAccess.org. Grand Canyon University, a private Christian university in beautiful Phoenix, Arizona, believes that we are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. GCU believes in equal opportunity and that the American dream starts with purpose. GCU equips you to serve others in ways that promote human flourishing and create a ripple effect of transformation for generations to come. By honoring your career calling, you impact your family, your friends, and your community. Change the world for good by putting others before yourself to glorify God. Whether your pursuit involves a bachelor's, master's, or doctoral degree, GCU's online, on-campus, and hybrid learning environments are designed to help you achieve your unique academic, personal, and professional goals. With 350 academic programs as of June 2024, GCU meets you where you are. It provides a path to help you fulfill your dreams. The pursuit to serve others is yours. Let it flourish. Find your purpose at Grand Canyon University, private, Christian, affordable. Visit gcu.edu. 3 years ago, a 25-year-old Honduran national named Medina Ulloa was stopped by Border Patrol agents in Texas. He gave them a fake name and lied about being a juvenile. But instead of kicking him out of the country, authorities gave him a notice to appear for a court date that everyone knew he, of course, would never actually attend. And then Ulloa was flown to Jacksonville, Florida, where he was taken in by a 46-year-old father of 4. Soon afterwards, the immigrant beat the man to death inside his own home. Now, last year, Medina Ulloa pleaded guilty to murder and received a 60-year sentence. And during the course of the prosecution that led to that plea deal, we learned a lot of details about what actually happened. We learned that Ulloa had attempted to tamper with evidence, for example. We also learned from home security footage that Medina Ulloa pummeled his victim with a chair before repeatedly stabbing him. But there was one critical detail that was never explained, even though it's maybe the most important piece of the entire story. And that is, how did Medina Ulloa get to Jacksonville? Did he buy a ticket himself, even though he had no money? Did someone else buy a ticket for him? Did he drive all that way? How did he get the car to drive? Or did Medina Ulloa arrive in Jacksonville on one of the Biden administration's secret resettlement flights, which take off in the middle of the night and ferry thousands of illegal aliens from Texas to destinations all over the country, maybe including Jacksonville? Now, in this case, the victim's daughter claimed that Ulloa had indeed arrived on one of those resettlement flights, and she would have reason to know that. Again, her father had allowed this guy into his home, and presumably they talked about how he had arrived in Jacksonville in the first place. But for their part, the Biden-Harris administration has refused to say anything about the arrangement, one way or another. Even when a Republican congressman formally asked the Biden administration to explain exactly what happened, they didn't confirm or deny that they had flown Ulloa into Jacksonville. Now, of course, that almost certainly means that they did indeed put him on one of their many charter jets for illegal aliens. And therefore, when Ulloa committed murder, the DHS knew that they were complicit. Their policy had facilitated a brutal killing. And so they decided not to talk about it. That was their solution. The federal government under Joe Biden and Kamala Harris apparently decided that they'd rather cover up their role in a homicide instead of taking action to prevent future homicides from occurring. So it's not surprising that those homicides have continued to occur in similar fashion. As you may have heard, the trial of 26-year-old Venezuelan illegal alien Jose Ibarra got underway this week in Athens, Georgia. Ibarra is accused of murdering Laken Riley, a 22-year-old nursing student, near a jogging trail at the University of Georgia back in February. Prosecutors say that Ibarra put on a hoodie-style jacket and a black hat and black disposable gloves, and then went off to, quote, hunt for females on the university's campus. Now, what we didn't know until yesterday is how exactly Ibarra got to Georgia in the first place. The government certainly didn't bother to tell us, but during the trial yesterday, we learned the answer to that question. According to Ibarra's roommate, just like Medina Ulloa, he received a taxpayer-funded resettlement flight. In the case of Ibarra, the flight took him from New York to Georgia. In other words, the Biden-Harris administration didn't just enable the murder of Laken Riley with their lax border policies, they also facilitated the murder by actually transporting the murderer to the place where he committed the crime. Watch.
Someone else that you got to know, that you lived with while you were here in Athens?
¿Alguien más que llegaste a conocer que vivió con ustedes aquí en Athens?
Giancarlo Hernández.
Giancarlos Hernández.
And how did you get to Athens?
¿Y cómo llegaron a Athens?
En Nueva York pedimos en Manhattan.
In New York, we asked in Manhattan.
En el Hotel Roosevelt.
And Hotel Roosevelt.
De Manhattan pedimos un vuelo humanitario aquí hasta Atlanta.
In Manhattan, we requested for a humanitarian flight to come here to Atlanta.
And when was that?
¿Y cuándo fue eso?
Como el de 9 a 10 de septiembre.
Around the 9th, 10th of September.
And where did you go when you arrived in Athens?
Y cuando llegó a Athens, ¿a dónde fue?
Al aeropuerto airport.
To the airport.
Al aeropuerto de Atlanta.
Airport.
Jackson Airport.
So that's great. Our trials in this country can't even be in English anymore. So, if we had a Department of Homeland Security that actually cared about securing the homeland, as it would seem that they should care about, because that's in the title of their agency, we wouldn't be hearing about this now, months after the fact and weeks after the election, not incidentally. We'd have heard about it back in February. The government would have acknowledged that they paid the airfare for a murderer, and there would have been months of congressional hearings by now. We'd know every detail about how exactly this brutal killer was ferried throughout the country at taxpayer expense. Instead, the Biden-Harris administration refused to say a word about this. It fell to a local prosecutor in Georgia to reveal that the federal government was covering this criminal's airfare. This is especially egregious when you consider that the DHS knew that Ibarra was a member of one of the most dangerous gangs on the planet. New York Post and News Nation have confirmed that, according to DHS sources, Jose Ibarra was a member of Tren de Aragua. And if you're keeping track, that's the same gang that's taken over several apartment complexes in Colorado. And this is the person they were paying to transport across the United States. Which really makes you wonder how many of those Colorado gang members were transported for free from the southern border. I mean, how did they get into Colorado? It also makes you wonder when we can expect criminal trials for the DHS officials who allowed this to happen. They were transporting a criminal that they knew or should have known was a member of a violent transnational criminal organization. How's that any different from offering, say, a member of ISIS a free one-way ticket to Manhattan? At a certain point, you can't pretend to be surprised at the natural and foreseeable consequences of government policy. When you facilitate the transportation of dangerous criminals who are members of notoriously brutal gangs, you don't get to feign astonishment when they go on to commit brutal crimes. And it's not as if Ibarra wasn't sending up red flags left and right, even apart from his gang ties. After the Biden administration let him into the country in September of 2022, supposedly due to a lack of bed space, which doesn't seem especially relevant since we don't need bed space to deport him, But since then, Ibarra somehow arrived in New York City, and once there, local officials put him up in the swanky Roosevelt Hotel in Midtown Manhattan. While he was there, he had access to free healthcare, free housing, free meals, even legal services to help him prepare his fraudulent asylum application. But that wasn't enough to keep Ibarra out of trouble. In August of 2023, Ibarra was arrested in New York for acting in a manner to injure a child less than 17. He was also hit with a vehicle license violation, according to DHS officials. But the local DA, Alvin Bragg, was too busy prosecuting the leading presidential candidate for an ancient business records violation, so he couldn't be bothered to prosecute Ibarra or give a heads up to federal immigration authorities. So Ibarra was released quickly and without any bond. Then Ibarra headed to another sanctuary city, thanks to the Biden administration's resettlement flight, Athens, Clarke County, Georgia. And October 27th, he was given a citation for shoplifting. Under the left-wing DA's policies, Ibarra wasn't arrested for the offense at the time. Instead, he was ordered to appear for a court hearing in December. But, of course, Ibarra ignored that hearing. So an arrest warrant was issued on December 20th. But he was never arrested. For months, he wasn't bothered by local authorities or by Biden's DHS, despite all of the crimes he committed in this country, across the country, and despite an active arrest warrant. He wasn't bothered in any way until February, when he put on his disposable gloves and murdered Laken Riley. And as the prosecutor outlined today, it was a vicious, brutal killing. Riley fought for 18 minutes, up until the point that her smartwatch recorded that her heart had stopped.
And when Laken Riley refused to be his rape victim, he bashed her skull in with a rock repeatedly. That is what this case is all about. The evidence will show that Laken fought. She fought for her life. She fought for her dignity. So the medical examiner, Laken was sent to GBI headquarters in Atlanta or Decatur, where Dr. DeMarco conducted an autopsy on her the very next day after her murder. What the medical examiner found is that Laken had depressed skull fracture on the left side of her head, and she had 8 other lacerations on the left side of her head, which literally look like holes. She had a small subarachnoid hemorrhage on the right side of her head, and she had multiple abrasions to her face, her neck, and her torso. She also had what's called petechia in both eyes, which is consistent with some form of asphyxia.
Now, one of the many ways that investigators were able to tie Ibarra to this crime is that just hours before he killed Riley, he posted photos of himself on Snapchat. And in those photos, he was wearing a black Adidas hat, a blue jacket, and a black and white shirt. Then after the killing, a man wearing the same clothing was captured on a Ring-style camera discarding a blue jacket into a dumpster. And when that jacket was tested, it contained Laken Riley's DNA. Watch.
At 9:44 in the morning, about 15 minutes after Laken Riley's heart stopped, this is what they see. So they saw an individual who they did not know who it was at the time, dump the jacket in the dumpster and go to those bushes there and dump something there.
Now, as you recall, the country endured a year of rioting over George Floyd, costing billions of dollars and leading to the deaths of several Americans. Police stations and churches were torched, federal courthouses were attacked, small businesses were destroyed. Members of Congress wore kente cloth and got down on one knee. It was all in service of a lie that Floyd's death was the result of systemic injustice instead of his own decisions. In particular, his decision to spend his life committing serious crimes, culminating in an attempt to defraud a business while high on enough fentanyl to kill a horse. Now, the murder of Laken Riley, on the other hand, actually was the result of systemic injustice. The government provided her killer access to this country in violation of the law. Then the government gave him free housing and meals and airfare to go wherever he wanted, which is very common, by the way. As House investigators found earlier this year, more than 50 airports have been used by DHS to transport more than 400,000 illegal aliens in this manner since January of last year. More than 1 million illegal aliens are on the waiting list right now. And the government did all this without putting it up for a vote or asking whether Americans wanted this to happen, even though overwhelmingly, of course, they don't. And then after one of these illegal aliens brutally murders a nursing student, the President of the United States finally apologized, but not to the victim or her family. Instead, he apologized for calling the killer an illegal during the State of the Union after mispronouncing Laken Riley's name. Here's that again to refresh our memories.
Laken Riley, an innocent young woman who was killed by an illegal. That's right.
You use the word illegal when talking about the man who allegedly killed Laken Riley.
An undocumented person. And I shouldn't have used illegal. It's undocumented. When I spoke about the difference between Trump and me, one of the things I talked about on the border was that the way he talks about vermin, the way he talks about these people polluting the blood. I talked about what I'm not going to do, what I won't do. I'm not going to treat any of these people with disrespect. Look, they built the country.
Now, when Biden made that apology, he knew that Riley's death could have been prevented several times in several different cities. His DHS knew that they had assisted the perpetrator of this heinous crime several times over. But the only apology that Biden could muster was to criminals like Jose Ibarra. He said illegal aliens built this country, which doesn't even begin to make sense. He didn't say a word about the role of these secret resettlement flights in causing Laken Riley's death, maybe because he was hoping we'd never find out about it. But now we have found out about it thanks to testimony from the killer's roommate, who incidentally is also in the country illegally, of course. This is what the open borders agenda means in practice. And we're once again seeing how a policy that's supposedly premised on compassion for illegal immigrants in reality translates into brutality and death for American citizens. That's been obvious to most people on the right for a while now, but now it's getting hard for anyone to ignore. That's why the exit polls show Kamala Harris losing on the immigration issue across party lines. The vast majority of Americans recognize at this point that we shouldn't be flying these illegal aliens throughout the country in the middle of the night or at any other time of day. We should be flying them out of the country back to wherever they came from. That's what the incoming Trump administration is promising to do. And unlike the Biden administration, the new administration isn't going to hide these flights. And the new border czar is openly promoting them already. And why shouldn't he? Enforcing the law is overwhelmingly popular. It's what Americans want. And, the great thing is when you're implementing a policy that's actually popular and it's what people want, it's what Americans want, you don't need to do it under the cover of darkness. You can talk about it on cable news, which is exactly what Trump's nominees are doing. This is a change that, as this trial in Georgia demonstrates, can't come soon enough. With the killing of Laken Riley months after the fact, we have discovered that the U.S. government was effectively an accomplice to the murder of an American citizen. And she's not the only one. They didn't just create the conditions that allowed this killing to happen by opening the border. They did do that, but they also facilitated the killing by providing repeated material support to the murderer. And then they tried to cover it up. And by the way, 6 Republican senators voted to confirm the DHS secretary who oversaw all of this. Something to keep in mind as the Trump cabinet appointments make their way through the Senate. Any senator who voted for Alejandro Mayorkas should explain that vote. And those senators, the ones who are still in office anyway, should explain what they plan to do going forward to dismantle the open borders agenda instead of enabling it as they have been doing. And the murder of Laken Riley makes it very clear that this change is long overdue. Once the killer is brought to justice in Georgia, all of his many enablers in the government should also be held to account. It's the only way to prevent a murder like this from happening again. And it's the only way to ensure that Americans can have any trust in their government going forward. This is the kind of radical reform that Americans actually voted for. Before the next woman like Laken Riley is killed, we need to enact it. Now let's get to our 5 headlines. You know what's fascinating about homeownership? It's this constant battle between order and chaos. And nothing embodies that chaos quite like failing gutters. They're not just an inconvenience, they're a genuine threat to the structure and stability of your home. That's where Leaf Filter comes in. Think of it as bringing order to chaos with their award-winning patented technology. This isn't just another quick fix. It's an engineered solution that keeps everything out except water with no gaps or openings for debris to slip through. The thing about protecting your home is that it requires both wisdom and practicality. Sure, you could keep climbing that ladder season after season or try those temporary solutions from the hardware store, but at what cost? Water damage from overflowing gutters can lead to flooding, roof damage, rotting siding, and even foundation issues. Over 1 million homeowners have already discovered the value of investing in Leaf Filter's permanent solution. When you schedule a free inspection, their trusted pros will clean out, realign, and seal your existing gutters before installing the Leaf Filter system. And yes, it comes with a lifetime no clogs guarantee. Don't miss out on your last chance of the year to save up to 35% off when you protect your gutters with Leaf Filters, America's #1 gutter protection system. Schedule your free inspection at leaffilter.com/Walsh. That's our lowest price of the year, up to 35% off at leaffilter.com/Walsh. See representative for warranty details. Jen Psaki has some thoughts about what the Democrats should do going forward after suffering such a catastrophic and humiliating defeat. And Jen's master plan is that Democrats should continue doing all the things that got them beat in the first place. That's her plan. That's her bright idea. Here it is.
There's obviously a lot of soul searching right now going on within the Democratic Party, and that's a good thing. But what I worry about is that in the course of all that soul searching, some Democrats might reach the wrong sweeping conclusions. And there are a lot of issues that fall into that bucket. But one in particular that stuck out to me is transgender rights. Republicans spent hundreds of millions of dollars on anti-trans ads this election cycle, including one that showed Vice President Harris talking about government funding for gender-reaffirming care for prisoners and detainees. If that sounds like a particularly obscure issue, it is, because it applies to a tiny group of people. And it's also a policy that, by the way, was in place during the first Trump presidency. Another one of the lines that ran over and over again in those ads and throughout right-wing media is this idea that America is faced with a crisis of boys playing in girls' sports. Now, these ads created this perception that the issues of trans kids playing sports was dominating schools across the country, which is completely false. Some people got pulled into that argument. I mean, immediately after the election, Congressman Seth Moulton told the New York Times that, quote, Democrats spend way too much time trying not to offend anyone rather than being brutally honest about the challenges many Americans face. I have 2 little girls. I don't want them getting run over on a playing field by a male or formerly male athlete. But as a Democrat, I'm supposed to be afraid to say that. And then last weekend, Congressman Moulton came on this network to discuss those comments.
I was just speaking authentically as a dad about one of many issues where I think we're just out of touch with the majority of voters. And I stand by my position. You know, maybe I didn't get all the words exactly right. But the point is that the backlash I've received proves my point that we can't even have these discussions as a party.
Look, reflection is good. But if that were actually an issue at thousands of schools across the country, it would be worthy of a debate. But there are just incredibly few examples of transgender girls playing in youth sports. And when we see those examples, there isn't evidence that these kids are a threat to safety or fairness.
Okay, so very few Democrats have ever so cautiously spoken up to say, hey guys, maybe we should cool it a bit with this trans stuff. Nobody agrees with us. Like, nobody in this country or in the history of the world anywhere on earth at any time agrees with us or ever has agreed with us about this. So maybe we should take that into account. And a few Democrats have said that, a few. And they've been immediately shut down and chastised by people like Jen Psaki, who insist that, no, they must stay on the trans ship as it sinks. Ride that thing all the way to the seafloor. That's what Jen Psaki is saying. And what argument does she make in favor of that? Well, she makes basically the only argument that people on her side of the issue ever make, which is to say she makes no argument at all. Notice she doesn't even attempt to actually defend the pro-trans position on any of these points. She doesn't explain why we should let boys into girls' sports or men into women's locker rooms. They never explain that. They can't. So it's amazing that we're supposedly having this quote-unquote debate about the issue, but one side of the debate has not even attempted to defend or articulate what their point of view actually is, because it's indefensible, and they know it. So really this is simple. Of course it's simple. Boys are boys, girls are girls. End of story. But if you're going to claim that we should allow males in female sports or into female bathrooms, you have to at least begin by explaining why. We shouldn't even have to explain why we don't want them there. We shouldn't have to explain it because it's self-evident. But also the burden of proof isn't on us. Okay, you're coming in and proposing a new system. Right? If you're on the left, if you're Jen Psaki, you're proposing something new. The old system was working just fine. The old system where girl bathrooms are for girls and girl sports teams are for girls, like that system worked fine. It was working perfectly fine. A lot of problems in the world, a lot of things that don't work, but that was not one of the problems. It was working. There was no issue. So now you're coming in and you're saying, well, we need to change that. Why? Why should we change it? You don't get to say, well, why don't you want us to change it? No. Why do you want to change it? Why should we? This system's working fine. You want to make this change. Why do you want to make it? What's the benefit? What problem does that solve exactly? If the problem that it solves is that some boys are sad if they can't use the girls' bathroom, well, that's not a problem. And anyway, it's already been established that plenty of girls are sad and infuriated and worried and scared when you let the boys in. So the emotional argument is at best a wash. That's being very, very generous. At best, it's a wash. So what else do you have? Well, you have nothing. So all they can do, as Jen Psaki just did, is from there is claim that, well, it's a small issue and there aren't very many men in women's sports. There aren't very many men receiving tax-funded sex changes in prison. But first of all, that argument obviously cuts both ways. No pun intended. If there are only relatively few boys trying to play in girls' sports, and you could say, well, then why do you care so much if they play? Why do you care so much if they don't? If it's just a handful of boys, if that's what it is, it's just a handful of athletes, wannabe female athletes who are actually boys that want to play in girls' sports. Well, then what's the problem? If the issue isn't important or relevant enough to bother banning boys from girls' sports, then how is it important or relevant enough to let them in to begin with? And as for the tax-funded surgeries, again, if it's only one or two prisoners asking for the surgeries, it should be no big deal and not very difficult to just say no. Wait, why can't you just say no? Like it barely impacts anyone, according to you. So it's a non-issue. Well, okay then just let it be a non-issue, if that's true. Let's just go back to the old system. No boys in girls' sports, no tax-funded sex changes. And at worst, according to you, a small handful of people will be inconvenienced and upset. Why should that matter? Who cares? You're always going to have a small handful of people that are upset about anything. Like, no matter what policy is in place, no matter what you're doing, you're going to find a handful of people who don't like it, at least. So they want to have it both ways, as always. They want to claim that there are hardly any boys playing in girl sports. But then if you ban them, they say that it's an egregious assault on the whole trans community and it will do untold and non-specific damage to countless trans people. Which is it? You know, the reality is that the exact numbers are totally irrelevant to the fundamental point. The fundamental point is that boys are not girls and therefore should not be in girl sports. And it's impossible to transition your gender. So gender transition surgeries are a scam. And taxpayers should not be forced to pay for a scam, especially not on behalf of criminals. So whether there's one boy trying to play in girl sports or 1 million boys, doesn't matter. The point remains true, regardless. And also, by the way, there are a lot more than one. Now, it's impossible to know exactly how many, how many male athletes are in female sports. We don't know exactly. Newsweek published an article last year claiming that the number, quote, can't be more than 100. That's what they said. There's no real basis for that. They have no evidence that it isn't more than 100, but that's their estimate that they, published. And by the way, not more than 100 in this case obviously means around 100 or about 100, because if they thought that it was, 5 or 10, if you think that it's only 5 boys and girl sports, you wouldn't say, well, it's not more than 100. So they seem to think it's around 100. Meanwhile, the UN published a report just a few weeks ago saying that female athletes have lost 900 medals to trans athletes, to men, since all this began. And that's what they're into. So these are significant numbers. But whatever the actual precise number of trans-identified males in female sports, it's clearly enough to be a problem. Even one would be a problem. But this is beyond that. I mean, this is a trend. It is a growing trend. And that's the other thing. The point of banning them from women's sports, it isn't just to kick out the men who are currently playing in women's sports. I mean, we want to do that, but also it's to prevent future. It's to prevent it from happening in the future. So even if it were true that, well, this isn't a real problem right now. Okay, well, we want to make sure that it's not a real problem in the future. Okay, that's not true. It is a problem now, but even if that were the case, so okay, well, let's make sure it doesn't become a problem then. So no matter how you slice it, you come back to they just have no argument. And so every video that you see like this, where you've got somebody on the left saying, no, we can't abandon the trans issue, what you'll notice is that they will never actually, they'll say we can't abandon our point on this, but they will not articulate what their point actually is. All right, moving on to this. Here's a pretty remarkable moment on Morning Joe yesterday. Watch.
Over the past week, Joe and I have heard from so many people, from political leaders to regular citizens, deeply dismayed by several of President-elect Trump's cabinet selections, and they are scared. Last Thursday, we expressed our own concerns on this broadcast and even said we would appreciate the opportunity to speak with the president-elect himself. On Friday, we were given the opportunity to do just that. Joe and I went to Mar-a-Lago to meet personally with President-elect Trump. It was the first time we have seen him in 7 years.
Now, we talked about a lot of issues, including abortion, mass deportation, threats of political retribution against political opponents, and media outlets. We talked about that a good bit. And it's going to come as no surprise to anybody who watches this show, has watched it over the past year or over the past decade, that we didn't see eye to eye on a lot of issues, and we told him so.
What we did agree on was to restart communications. My father often spoke with world leaders with whom he and the United States profoundly disagreed. That's a task shared by reporters and commentators alike. We had not spoken to President Trump since March of 2020, other than a personal call Joe made to Trump on the morning after the attempt on his life in Butler, Pennsylvania. In this meeting, President Trump was cheerful, he was upbeat, he seemed interested in finding common ground with Democrats on some of the most divisive issues. And for those asking why we would go speak to the president-elect during such fraught times, especially between us, I guess I would ask back, why wouldn't we? 5 years of political warfare has deeply divided Washington and the country. We have been.
I can't watch any more of this. That's what we call kissing the ring, and it's amazing. Kind of tough to watch, embarrassing to watch. Embarrassing to see people debase themselves this way, groveling like this. Not that it's debasing to speak to Donald Trump, but it's debasing to come crawling back, groveling after spending the last 8 years obsessively attacking the guy. Now, why are they doing this? Well, they aren't doing it because they want to heal our divided nation or whatever nonsense they're talking about. That's for damn sure. They aren't even doing it because they lost the election. You know, they're not doing it because Trump's going to be in power now and they feel like they have to be nice to him, or because they want to be close to him to benefit from the power that he has. I don't think any of those are the reasons. The reasons are very simple, actually. The reasons are ratings. Their ratings are in the toilet. Their whole network is dying. There just isn't a very big audience for constant Trump bashing anymore. That's what it comes down to. People are tired of it. They're bored of it. They're finally realizing that Trump bashing is a very narrow lane. You know, because you're only going to appeal to Democrats, obviously. And even in that group, you're only appealing to the Democrats who still have an appetite and a desire to hear you complain about Donald Trump relentlessly. But that gets old. You know, even for people who agree with it, it becomes old. I mean, I can remember in Obama's second term, you know, I kind of stopped listening to a lot of the talk radio that I had previously enjoyed simply because I was just bored of hearing complaints about Obama all the time. And now the difference is that Obama was actually a disastrously terrible president, and I think his presidency will go down as the worst in American history. So there was a lot to complain about. Don't get me wrong. And I'm not saying I warmed to the guy by the end, not remotely. It's just that I got sick of hearing about him. You know, you just get, it's like hearing about the same guy over and over and over again for years, and hearing what a terrible person he is and what a terrible president. Yeah, he is. That's true in Obama's case. But I don't need to hear that every single day for 8 years. Like, I get it. So this kind of exhaustion can set in regardless of the president, but in this case, it's an even bigger problem for MSNBC because Trump just won in a landslide. And also, he'll be a good president. Already was a good president. A good president enacting an agenda that 75 million Americans voted for. So whining about him every day puts you in a narrow lane within a narrow lane. And you've automatically ruled out the majority of the country, you know, from listening. So it's simply a ratings game, I think. They're trying to rebrand. They're going to try to, you know, pivot into not becoming committed Trump boosters, you know. That's what they were back in 2015. But I don't think they're going to go that far. I would guess that they're going to attempt kind of a Bill Maher style transition. You know, they're going to try to reposition themselves as sort of the level-headed liberals who, you know, aren't Trump supporters, but also don't feel the need to attack him constantly, will even agree with him on occasion sometimes, pointing out some of the excesses on your own side. Like that's probably what they're going to try to transition into, if I had to guess. And not because they believe in it or for any reason other than simply that's where the audience is, and they recognize that. But I don't think it's going to work for them. I don't think that Mika and Joe Scarborough can carve out like a Bill Maher style lane. I just don't think it's going to work. Okay, Breitbart has this. Leftists have a master plan to ensure that President-elect Donald Trump's economy tanks. They're not going to buy anything. Leftists across the country are still reeling from Trump's historic comeback victory, which saw him sweeping all 7 swing states. There was a sizable shift in the electorate and a clear mandate for change, but some leftists ardently disagree and have a plan to tank what everyone anticipates to be a strong economy under Trump's leadership. One leftist account with 127,000 followers said, Trump will not have a good economy because we don't have to let him. I myself plan on paying my bills and saving every penny beyond that. I will not contribute to this economy in any other way. This individual is also pledging to refrain from eating out unless it's an emergency that cannot be avoided. You know, one of those emergencies where you have to go to a restaurant. Further, there will be no going to the movies, sporting events, or any local attractions. New furniture or household goods will wait until 2028. I'm going to install a few other search bars and avoid Google as much as possible. I will not buy a new car before 2028. I will do everything in my power to hold on to as many dollars as possible. Another user with 1.3 million followers says, over the next 4 years, I highly suggest folks tighten their belts and spend as little as possible, except for the essentials like food, utilities, rent, etc. After riding the coattails of President Biden's amazing economy for his first 6 months in office, Trump is going to destroy it with his dumb policies. Not buying extra will help sink his economy too. It won't be hard since everything will be 300% more expensive. Save that money, pass it on. Okay, so if you're keeping track at home, first we had leftist women saying that they were going to get back at Trump by refusing to have sex with random men. And now we have some leftists saying that they're going to exact vengeance by saving their money and not making frivolous purchases. These are positive lifestyle changes. Like, yes, you should stop having sex with random men. Yes, you should waste less money and save more of your money. These are improvements that you can make to your life, and you should. They're objectively good choices. So the funny thing is that on the left, it seems that they only make improvements out of spite. You know, the only way to get them to do the right thing is to make them mad, and then they'll do the right thing to punish you somehow. I'll show you. I'm gonna live responsibly now. How do you like that, huh? Next thing you know, they're going to be eating a more nutritious diet, getting more exercise, all as part of their diabolical plan to punish Donald Trump. Now, I guess that, you know, as the saying goes, living well is the best revenge, but I think these leftists have maybe taken that a bit too literally. I don't know. Christmas is coming, and let's be honest, the woke corporations are already planning ways to ruin it. Get ahead of the holiday chaos with Jeremy's Razors, where we're fighting the left and saving Christmas early. Lock in 25% off the highly rated Precision 5 razor and all shave, hair, and body essentials for shame-free stocking stuffers. Perfect for dads, uncles, brothers, sons, and any self-respecting man who knows he is one. Stop giving your money to woke corporations that hate you. Start checking off your list at jeremysrazors.com. The #1 documentary of the decade is now Academy Award submitted. You heard that right, submitted. We are officially potential nominees at the Academy Awards. Of course, we're talking about Am I Racist? My follow-up to the cultural phenomenon, What is a Woman? The most asked question about Am I Racist is, was it real? The shocking answer is yes. Everything you see in the movie is real, and lucky for you guys, I included exclusive bonus footage where I break down exactly how we pulled it all off. The only place to watch Am I Racist and all the exclusive bonus content is on Daily Wire Plus. Stream it right now. Now let's get to our daily cancellation. A while ago on the show, we discovered the concept of girl math. And for those who need a refresher course on this academic subject, girl math describes the sorts of mental calculations that women make when they're out shopping. Girl math is less math and more magical thinking. So for example, according to girl math, if a woman buys some totally unnecessary item for $63, well, she just lost $63. However, if that same exact item is $63, but it was originally $90, then instead of losing $63, she has just made $27. That 30% discount immediately becomes profit for the female customer. Now, a man might point out that even if the item was on sale, she still spent money she didn't need to spend on an item that she didn't need to buy. The 30% discount doesn't change the fact that she's out the $63. In fact, a man might also argue discounts are usually fake anyway. So most of the time, the alleged discounted price is just the price. If the item on the shelf is $14.99, but the store claimed the regular sale price is $23.99, the alleged regular sale price is almost always imaginary. Like they've never actually sold the item for $23.99. The price is always just $14.99. The sale is a marketing ploy. Now, this is what men so often try to explain, but to no avail. That's how a woman can go out and buy a car full of junk that she doesn't need and still feel like she has somehow saved hundreds of dollars. As long as she buys stuff on sale, she isn't actually spending any money in her mind. She's making money. So girl math taken to its logical end would mean that if you have $0 in your bank account, you could still buy an infinite amount of merchandise on sale because you're making money. You're not spending it. If you make $14 an hour working retail, there's no reason why you can't buy a Lamborghini for $250,000 if the normal sale price is $300,000, because then they're paying you $50,000 to take the car. $50,000 in a new car, that's a hell of a deal. And that's kind of how girl math works. Now, here's the question. What happens when girls run the government? Well, it turns out that we get a government operating on the principles of girl math. And that brings us finally to Kathy Hochul, the governor of New York. She just held a press conference where she made an exciting announcement. Kathy informed the people of New York that she had just saved them $1,500 a year. Now, it's not often that a Democrat politician saves taxpayers' money, so this was welcome news, shocking news. But how exactly did she pull this off? How is she going to save New Yorkers $1,500? Well, let's find out.
During this process, from day one, I have made affordability for New York families a top priority. I always have, and I always will, fight to put more money in the pockets of everyday New Yorkers. That's why back in June, I stood up on behalf of hardworking families and simply said no. No to a new $15 congestion toll that at that particular time was just too much. Too many people were worrying about high costs, groceries, rent, childcare. These are real challenges for our families. And launching a toll that high really would have hurt a working mom or working dad trying to make ends meet, especially someone driving in from a transportation desert or far from outside the center of the city. And I'm proud to announce we have found a path to fund the MTA, reduce congestion, and keep millions of dollars in the pockets of our commuters. Under this plan, the MTA will implement a congestion pricing plan with a reduced daytime toll of $9 beginning in January. You heard that correctly. It was $15 before, and now it is $9. That is a 40% reduction. This lower toll will save daily commuters nearly $1,500 annually. And that kind of money makes a big difference for our families.
So did you get that? You see, Kathy was going to charge commuters $15 to drive to work every morning, but now she's only going to charge $9. So just to be clear, she is not reducing an already existing toll. She is, in fact, adding a new toll, and the new toll is $9, which is pretty steep, but it could have theoretically been even steeper, which means that you're saving money every time you lose money on the toll. This is what Kathy Hochul, professor of girl math, is claiming. New Yorkers should thank Kathy for her generosity. Now, every time they go through the toll now, they earn $6. Now, on the surface, it seems like they're paying $9, but they could have been forced to pay $15, which means they're earning $6. I mean, I think that Kathy is being a bit too modest, because really this theoretical toll could have been any amount of money. The many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics states that everything that can possibly happen is happening in one of the infinite number of parallel universes. And this would mean that there's a universe where the toll is $15. There's also a universe where the toll is $30, even $50. Indeed, there is a universe where the poor people of New York are forced to pay $1 billion every time they pass through the toll. And the person who saved us from that horrible possibility is Kathy Hochul. She just saved every commuter in New York $1 billion a day. Think about that. This kind of logic is, it's a lot of fun, actually. I mean, it can be used in so many other contexts. For example, and I'm not suggesting that you do this, but you could walk up to somebody on the street and rob them at gunpoint and then tell them that you just saved their life because you were going to rob them and kill them, but instead you're just robbing them. Now, sure, you're still robbing them, but think about how much worse it could have been. You have just heroically rescued this person from the evil clutches of yourself. They should be grateful. In fact, that was another possibility for the toll. I mean, Kathy, she could have put in place a toll where commuters are charged $15 and then also shot. She could have. That's a possible world. Imagine that. That would have made for a pretty hectic commute to work. But now they'll only have to pay $9 and they won't be shot. So Kathy saved them $6 and also saved their lives. I mean, this woman, she's a hero. I guess that's how we're supposed to see this anyway. This is the consequence of girl math, otherwise known as gaslighting, especially when it's done by elected officials. And unfortunately, there's some reason to think that plenty of people will fall for this. There is a lot of precedent to this kind of thing with the government. Just think about, for example, how most people react when they get a tax refund. They seem to believe that they're being gifted free money from the government. In reality, the government is just returning a small portion of the money they already took from you. You're still losing money on taxes every year. And in fact, you're losing money even on the money they return because it isn't returned with interest. But most people don't think about that. They're just happy to get the check. As it turns out, the IRS is the ultimate proponent of girl math. Our whole tax system runs on this philosophy. It is truly a scourge. And that is why Kathy Hochul and all of the other proponents of girl math in government and outside of it are today canceled. That'll do it for the show today. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Talk to you tomorrow. Have a great day. Godspeed.
If you want to cut through the madness of all the top stories in politics, culture, and even religion, which is the foundation of politics and culture, then come check out The Michael Knowles Show, where you can join me for an authentically conservative perspective. I'll see you then.